Hi, welcome back to Spring CS170. Gonna continue on with the flowchart and pseudocode stuff that we talked about in the last lecture. But before I do that, I want to just hop back to some questions that have been coming up for assignment 4. Let me just zoom this a little bit. Okay, so here's assignment 4. Um, So a couple points kind of came up here. Let me see where we have here. So basically, you're gonna have like your main HTML file, and then you're gonna have a couple sub or children HTML files that you're gonna point to off your menu here. And then you got the CSS file that comes with this, right? So all of this is part of the zip file that you get. Okay, so you can be working off of this. You don't have to come up with this from scratch, which I think is pretty helpful. So that's part of the assignment. Now, once you have all of that kind of up and running, so here's a couple of things here. Number one, of course, you got to put your name and stuff in here into the head section of all the HTML files. And then you have like, you can pick any of these two people here. Um, and this is, remember, this is all pointing to the main HTML, right? You see all of this here. And you can see this point here where it says like you have 3 introductory paragraphs, short paragraphs. I mean, we're not writing a novel here, right? So uh, the question came up like, okay, is it 3 for each of those people or 3 in total? So the answer is 3 in total, right? But be careful here, like don't like just copy and paste something into here, right? Um, so yeah, just put something in here reasonable. We're not asking you to write long paragraphs or anything, and it's 3 total. So however you want to split it up, just go ahead and do that. So I don't think that should be too taxing on people. And you have this part here where it says you want to display the people that you selected. Okay, so that's for the menu. Okay, um, there's a couple ways you can do that. However you want to do it, right? You want to just put the picture next to the link, or you want to make it so that name of the person is the link. Um, I kind of suggest that you can put the picture there, but you kind of have the name underneath it, and then that's the link that goes to the children HTML. Okay, because not everybody can just look at a picture and say, oh, that's whoever, right? Charles Babbage, or whoever you want to pick on here. So my suggestion is to, you can put the picture there, and then to the left of it, to the bottom of it, or whatever, you actually have the text, the name of the person, and that's the link that goes into the children page. Okay, so that's my suggestion there. Now, once you get to the children page, I know some people are asking about the image here. Well, what's the difference between the image here and the image here? The difference is that you can see here, you're going to have the image pointing to whatever external absolute path, like the full URL of wherever you're going to go to, and that's the difference. Okay, so right here where it says insert a picture, that will also act as a hyperlink leading to external web page. That's very key here, external web page, right? So like Pioneer 1 and Pioneer 2 would be considered internal web page because that's local to you. You're playing around with it. It's on your file system. External web page, remember, that's your absolute path. That's your full path, right? These Pioneer 1 and 2 are your local, right? So that could be relative path. Essentially, probably just in the same folder as your main HTML. Okay, so keep all of that in mind here. Okay, I know some people have some questions about it. That's kind of the difference there. Okay, so like I said, look at this carefully, right? Insert a picture that will insert as a hyperlink leading to external web page, okay, with general information about the person related to the HTML page, right? So whatever, Wikipedia, something like that, whatever, right? Just link to that, and you should be fine. Okay. think that those are the main things there. I haven't seen any other questions popping up on this, but you should be able to go through this. Some people, for whatever reason on the assignments, have been forgetting to do this, right? Put in your honor statement. Please make sure you do that. And then if there's any issues, let's say you kind of screwed up and you didn't include it for some reason, you need to reach out to your TAs, right? The TAs are actually the ones that grade your assignments, right? So I'm here, I'm the messenger, I'm sending you this information, I explain things, people send me questions, I try to answer questions on Piazza and stuff like that, but ultimately I'm not the one that's grading your assignments, right? I can remind the TAs about something. I can say, hey, look, can you look out for this person or whatever, but it's kind of better if you have a particular issue, let's say you forgot to put in your honor statement or something like that, like you reach out to your TA and just work with them, right? Maybe you have to send the honor statement separately on email or something like that. That's fine, okay? I think that's all I wanted to cover on this. So let's get back to the topic of this lecture. In case you haven't seen it, I've been putting these in here. So I did the first 2 lectures already. Here's the reading resources. And while I'm here, let me just click on this. I remember last lecture I referred to the flowchart symbols and the pseudocode reference guide, right? So flowchart symbols, let's click on that. Okay, come on, it's going slow. All right, here we go. All right, so it's kind of like what I covered in the lecture, right, on the PowerPoint. So whichever one works for you, right? So you got this, and you got this, right? This refers to it as the terminator, but it's really starting or ending, right? And or ending. So you have to have a start, and you have to have an ending, okay? I'm not really sure why they call it a terminator. It covers both, right? But then you have to process, right? Remember, this is kind of equivalent to the ALU from the last chapter or last week covers. So like the ALU, right? It's the calculation, right? Whatever you're doing is happening in here, right? And then here, this is like your if statement, your decision, right? So if the number is above 500, do this. If it's below 500, do this, right? So your 2 paths. Remember, they're a stickler for this, right? So when you do this type of flow chart, with this diamond, you have to really make sure it's 2 going out, right? It's either yes, no, greater than, less than, whatever, right? I guess something like a less than equal or greater than equal or something like that. And if you have to have like something that has basically like 3 choices, you kind of have to nest it, and I'll show you an example of that a little bit later on, okay? But it's very important, like they're very stickler on that type of stuff for the grading. The diamond, you could only have 1 in and 2 out, right? And I think I covered that in the PowerPoint for the last lecture too, which I'll roll back to in a second. And then you remember the input output, right? Secondary storage, it could be keyboard, it could be mouse, it could be, for the output side, it could be like the monitor or, your screen or whatever, right? And then remember these flow lines here, okay? And then I think this is kind of useful. Let me see if I can zoom this a bit. Is these examples here, right? So it's very good reference on these type of things here. This is pretty much a kind of an easy case here, right? So you got the start, it flows through, you got your input, your calc, and then your output, okay? Actually, this print sum is not correct, okay? When you print something, that's your output, right? So remember what I said, parallelogram is input and output. So unfortunately, this example is not good, right? This is correct, right? Where you have the calculation in this rectangle here, that's good. Unfortunately, this print sum being your output, that's not right, right? That should be a parallelogram. Okay. So here's a decision tree, not decision tree, just a decision diamond here, right? You can see what I was saying, like here's your two paths, right? Yes and no, right? Uh, and then you follow this path, and notice all of these arrows, even though you took this path here and this path here, they all come back together and finish at the end. Okay, so you can't, well, not that you can't, but you should not end up in a situation where like one side goes to a yes and it kind of drifts off to something, and then you have like another side doing whatever and then it goes to an end. Everything should be coming back together to this end oval shape at the end here. Okay, so that's another thing to be mindful of. So this one doesn't have the idea of like the nested decisions, which I'll try to cover that in either this lecture or the following lecture. Okay. Let me go back here, and where are we at? Pseudocode. Okay, pseudocode. Okay, let me zoom this a little bit. Okay, so pseudocode is kind of like almost like a layperson's description of your algorithm, pretty close to like how the computer is going to actually implement this code. Okay, it's not exact, obviously, but it comes pretty close. And I'll tell you how these fit together in a second. So, uh, so I'll just read across like this one, right? So here's your type of thing you're doing. This is the input, and it'll be like reading, right? So like read variable, right? It could be like input from keyboard or whatever, right? So you're having this as a read instruction, and in this case, you're reading a variable, and they're making an example saying number one, right? So you got number one, number two, or something like that as your input, right? So that's what that is. Your output is your display, okay? So you took this variable, you did something to it, and now you're going to display it, right? So you display the variable, and then an example is display num1, okay? And you can see all of these different things here. I'm not going to go through these, and here's some more examples here. Okay, again, good for you to take a look at these, try to understand these, be able to refer to them for exam number 2. This is not on exam number 1. Okay, all right, so there you have it. That's over here, which I've put in here. It's also under modules here. Okay, but if you're on my page, you got everything in here. Okay, so where was I? Flowcharts. So here, I think I was almost, this is like one slide before where I want to start off for this lecture. Just to pull things back a little bit, here's your flowchart, and you can say this is sort of like your algorithm pseudocode, right? Uh, it doesn't quite match the format or flow of the other pseudocode reference that I have here, but you get the idea, right? It kind of lays it in fairly logical steps, which you'll be using to implement code off of, right? And then, you know, similar here, like the flowchart, you kind of get a visual flowchart, right? Of watching all of these different things happen here, right? So they have pretty much clear example of all of the different shapes that we talked about for the flowchart. So you say, okay, well, why do I have all this stuff? Well, very few times, if I describe to you, say, okay, what do you do when you log into Facebook? Yeah, I can probably tell like a regular programmer saying this is what you have to do, and based on their past experience and based on me telling them, they might be able to just go in there and start coding right away. Okay, but it doesn't always work work out that way. In fact, a lot of times it doesn't, right? So a lot of times what you want to do is before you like understand like what someone's asking you to do with the computer, and then you just go right at it and start coding, um, you try to flesh out, clarify, refine like the requirements, right? So you go through and you talk to essentially like this algorithm, and you essentially will come up with a combination or one of these, right? Like a flow chart and people can follow it along, or some sort of pseudocode, right? And this kind of helps you shake it out. You start like saying, oh, okay, if I have this, what are the different values that I can put in? Like what happens if I put in like a good value, like a real user, and like their password, everything checks out, it goes through. What happens if I put in an invalid user? What happens if it's a good user but they put in a bad password? Like those type of things, and it'll kind of all flesh out. And all of this kind of happens before you actually start writing any code at all. So that's really what it comes down to, right? You start working on the algorithm, you start translating it into something like a pseudocode or flowchart or both. And this helps people kind of talk it through on paper before they start implementing stuff. Once you start to implement stuff right away off of like just someone talking and saying, oh, this is what we want to do, uh, it usually ends up being a pretty bad idea, right? A lot of times people end up implementing stuff and then you have to throw it away and do it all over again, or you end up really patching it a lot of times, and it's just not good, right? That's what leads to things with security holes and people doing all kinds of bad things to your code. You can't support it, stuff like that. So doing stuff like this with the flowchart, the pseudocode, really kind of clarifying the algorithm. You'll be doing things like putting in use cases, putting in like different types of data, see how it flows through all of this stuff. Um, Try to kick the tires a little bit, really. That's part of the process. So that's, if you're wondering, this is how like flowcharts and pseudocode kind of fit into the picture when you're talking about implementing a program. Okay, taking it from idea to implementation, really, this is part of it. Okay, so anyway, let's get back to covering some of this stuff here. So, okay, this is a very common type of calculation, right? No, it's pretty clear cut. Nothing in dispute here, right? Nothing really too much to debate here, right? Changing Fahrenheit to Celsius. Okay, um, so if you start off with the F in Fahrenheit, you're gonna take away 32, and you're gonna multiply it by 5/9, right? And then you're gonna get Celsius, right? And likewise, from your basic math concept, if you want to flip it around the other way, you can go from Celsius to Fahrenheit. Okay. The other one is to calculate the pay for a number of hours worked, and you're given your pay per hour also. So you have your hours and your hours per way, pay per hour. You should be able to calculate how much money you made, right? Okay. So, well, here we go. All right, so what are you going to do? Well, here's your start oval. Don't really know why this end oval is blue shape here. If I'm going to start this with this color here, I probably end it with the same color, but yeah, not like you're going to really get scored based on your color choices here. So you have the start. Well, okay, here, I'm going to do an input, right? That's why you have the parallelogram. And then you have your Fahrenheit, right? So F is your input there, and it doesn't quite match up to what I have on the coding here, right? Because they're declaring the variable to be Fahrenheit, okay? But I don't think it takes too much of a leap for you to go from input F equals to Fahrenheit on the right-hand side here, right? This thing here, if you can see it. And then it basically takes that calculation we just did on the prior page, right? So F minus 32 times 5/9. Okay, you did that calculation, and then out comes your output, right? it doesn't really, well, just like the input, it doesn't really say how you got the F. Likewise, your output C, it doesn't really say how you output it. But let's say it goes to the screen or something like that. And then you have the end, okay? So from a coding perspective, you might look at it like this. This is not really pseudocode, but it's a fairly straightforward calculation, so I think that's fine. You can just, you know, type in this code here. So you have the variable, right? var stands for variable, Fahrenheit, and Celsius, right? Remember, this is going to be your input, this is going to be output, and they're saying, well, okay, what's your Fahrenheit? Okay, and you put in Fahrenheit, whatever that number happens to be. Okay, so in some ways, this is kind of like pseudocode. Okay, because with this Fahrenheit here, like if you actually do this, this is not actually how you ask for input for Fahrenheit. Right, so this is just you and me talking, right? We're talking it through and say, okay, yeah, here's your Fahrenheit. You got to put in a value for this, right? When you actually write this in code, it's not going to look like this, right? But the idea is, give me the input for Fahrenheit, whatever it is. Celsius, you have the Fahrenheit minus 32 times 5/9, right? And then it has an alert for Celsius. Okay. Yeah, and just let me clarify again on this. This is your way you can input Fahrenheit if you're programming it and you just kind of hard code your Fahrenheit in here to be the same. Okay, so technically, yeah, you can put a number here and then you're good, right? But I think you would never really write a program like that, right? You would write a program to ask a user to input whatever number for your Fahrenheit, and then you do your calculation, and then, you know, you would do this thing. Alert is basically just to display this Celsius number here. Okay, sorry, I kind of talked a bit on this. We didn't really need to talk too much about it, but that's kind of what happens here. So let's take a look at this one. This is the calculation for your pay given your hours. Okay, so hopefully that's pretty straightforward. You input your hours or your pay rate, you calculate your total pay, and then output it. Right, and you should really be able to draw a comparison to this. It looks pretty similar, right? You declare your variables, you put in your inputs here, you calculate it, and then you alert out. Right, so these things are very similar here. Right, shouldn't be any disputing this. And then now we put in a little tweak. Well, what happens if you want to work overtime? Okay, right, and that's where we kind of get your decision diamond here. Right, so now I did more than 40 hours, then you tweak it by, you do time and a half, right, 1.5 as your pay rate, and then that comes back around to here, right? And then if you didn't do overtime, then you do this, and notice, like I said, both the branches, they came back together, then you did the output pay, and then you did the end, right? So again, I'll just repeat this. This is important, the fact that you branched off only 2 of these flows, and then this is important, where it comes back together and flows into this end. Okay, so let me close it with this, and this will be the next part we're going to start for your introduction into JavaScript. All right, thank you.